My name is Chloe, and at 33 years old, I never expected my father to text me right before a highly classified briefing. Do not come to your sister's engagement party tomorrow. The guest list is final, and we cannot have you embarrassing us. So I threw away my Boston boarding pass and went right back to the White House. But later that night, my sister called me, her voice shaking with panic. How could you do this to our family? My father had just seen the cover of the most exclusive magazine in the country, and he realized his massive mistake. For my entire life, my family treated me like an outcast. I was the ultimate family disappointment, the lonely computer geek who could never measure up to my perfect sister Vanessa. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments right below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic parents who underestimated your true worth. The polished marble floors of the West Wing echoed beneath my heels as I walked toward the Situation Room. I had a thick stack of classified defense briefings in my hand. I was preparing to review federal contracts worth billions of dollars. The weight of that responsibility was something my family could never comprehend. To them, I was just a girl who fixed laptops. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out expecting an urgent update from the Secretary of Defense. Instead, I saw a new message from my father Richard. I stopped and stared at the glowing screen. Do not bother coming to Boston for Vanessa's engagement party tomorrow. The guest list is final. Marcus comes from an incredibly wealthy political family in D.C. They have standards. Your mother does not want your freelance computer gigs making us look like peasants. Stay home and do not ruin this for your sister. I did not cry. I did not drop my folders in shock. A long time ago, a text like that would have shattered my heart, but I had learned to build an iron wall around my emotions. They had always favored Vanessa, treating her like royalty while ignoring my achievements. I simply typed back, "No worries. Have a great party." I walked over to a nearby trash can and dropped my first-class boarding pass to Boston right into the bin. Just as the paper hit the bottom, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother, Beatrice. Her text was a perfect display of the cruelty I grew up with. Do not send a cheap gift to compensate. Marcus asked about you today, and I told him you were currently in a rehab facility out west. Keep your mouth shut and do not post anything online. My own mother was literally killing me off socially. She was painting me as a struggling addict just to save face with his family. Marcus Sterling was a brilliant African-American tech CEO from a highly respected old money family. His parents were political royalty, known for their strict morals and absolute intolerance for deceit. My parents were desperate to secure his wealth, and they viewed my existence as a stain on their carefully curated image. They wanted to erase me completely so they could pretend to be the extremely perfect aristocratic family. I put my phone away and pushed open the heavy oak doors of the briefing room. I spent the next 4 hours deciding the fate of national security infrastructure, completely undisturbed by the people in Boston who thought I was a pathetic failure. When my workday ended, I did not go home to cry in my apartment. Instead, I stepped out of the White House and slid into the back of a black government SUV that was waiting for me at the curb. My driver handed me a secure tablet, but I ignored it, looking out the tinted windows at the city skyline. That evening, Washington was hosting the most exclusive national security gala of the decade. Since I was no longer attending my sister's engagement party, I decided to wear the dress I had originally purchased for the occasion. It was a stunning custom-tailored emerald silk gown that draped perfectly across my figure, costing more than my parents' entire monthly mortgage. I paired it with diamond drop earrings and a classic updo. When my security detail opened the car door for me at the venue, the cool evening air hit my face. I stepped onto the red carpet and the energy shifted immediately. Bright flashbulbs completely blinded me from every single possible direction. Cameras clicked furiously as reporters called out my name, begging for a quote about the latest cyber defense initiatives. I walked past the velvet ropes with absolute confidence, nodding respectfully to senators and top-tier defense contractors who scrambled to catch my attention. Near the entrance to the grand ballroom, a familiar face stepped out of the bustling crowd. It was the editor-in-chief of Capital Elite, the most prestigious political and high society magazine in the country. She approached me with a bright, triumphant smile. "Ms. Chloe Vance," she said, her voice carrying clearly over the chaotic noise of the flashing cameras. "The cover photo we took last week turned out absolutely perfect. The new issue goes to print tonight and will be distributed everywhere. America needs to know who is really securing our nation from the shadows." I smiled back at her, knowing exactly what would happen when that magazine hit the newsstands the next morning. My parents had tried to bury me in a lie, but tomorrow they would see my face staring back at them from the pinnacle of the very society they were so desperately trying to impress. They wanted to permanently hide me away from the world, but the entire world was just about to put me right on the center stage. 400 miles away from my Washington office, the ballroom of the Boston Harbor Hotel dripped with excessive floral arrangements and overpriced champagne. My parents had spared absolutely no expense for Vanessa's engagement party, primarily because they were funding the entire event on credit lines they could no longer afford. They needed this marriage. Marcus Sterling was not just a brilliant tech CEO with a company valued in the hundreds of millions. He was the only son of Senator Thomas Sterling and Vivian Sterling, a couple whose political influence and generational wealth commanded respect across the entire Eastern Seaboard. For Richard and Beatrice Vance, marrying their golden child into the Sterling family was the ultimate bailout and the ultimate status symbol. The string quartet played softly in the background as my parents aggressively cornered Marcus and his family near the Raw bar. Beatrice was practically glowing, her designer gown catching the light as she laughed loudly at a joke the senator made. Vanessa stood next to Marcus, clutching his arm, playing the role of the blushing bride-to-be. Marcus looked handsome and genuinely happy, completely unaware of the venomous reality of the family he was marrying into. Vivian Sterling, a woman whose elegance was matched only by her razor-sharp intellect, took a delicate sip of her sparkling water. She looked around the crowded ballroom, her eyes scanning the faces of our extended family. She then turned her polite but piercing gaze directly onto my mother. "Beatrice," Vivian said smoothly, "the party is stunning, but I noticed someone missing from the family portraits displayed in the foyer. Where is your youngest daughter?" Marcus mentioned she was unable to attend tonight. My mother did not miss a beat. She had been rehearsing this exact lie for weeks. Beatrice placed a hand over her heart and forced a heavy, tragic sigh. Her eyes immediately welled up with perfectly summoned tears. "Oh, Vivian," Beatrice murmured, her voice trembling with practiced sorrow. "It breaks my heart to even speak about it. Poor Chloe is battling severe addiction. We had to admit her to a long-term rehabilitation facility out west just last month. She is not allowed any contact with the outside world right now." Marcus frowned, his protective instincts kicking in. He looked down at Vanessa. "You did not tell me it was that serious, Vanessa. You only said she was away dealing with some personal issues." Vanessa immediately stepped up to support the lie, placing her hand gently against Marcus's chest. "I did not want to burden you with our family tragedy, honey." She looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Chloe has always resented my success. When my lifestyle brand took off, she just could not handle being the shadow of the family. She dropped out of community college and just spiraled. I tried so hard to save her, I really did. But you cannot help someone who refuses to help themselves." Richard wrapped a comforting arm around Vanessa, playing the solemn patriarch. "We have spent tens of thousands on treatments," he added, shaking his head. "But her jealousy just consumed her. We are praying she finds peace, but right now we simply have to focus on the positive things in our lives." Vivian offered a sympathetic nod, though her eyes remained sharp and calculating. "Addiction is a terrible disease," she said simply. "I commend your strength." The Vances collectively exhaled. They had successfully killed me off. In their minds, they had permanently established Vanessa as the triumphant entrepreneur and relegated me to the role of the bitter, unstable failure who could not be trusted. The threat of my existence had been neutralized. The party continued into the late evening. Waiters circulated with silver trays of caviar. Beatrice was busy taking photos with local socialites, loudly dropping the senator's name into every conversation. Richard was at the bar, attempting to impress Marcus's venture capital friends with exaggerated stories about his own manufacturing business. They were flying high on a cloud of absolute delusion. Near the entrance of the grand ballroom, Senator Sterling stood quietly checking his phone. His security detail maintained a discreet distance. Suddenly, his chief of staff pushed through the heavy mahogany doors holding a thick, glossy magazine. The aide walked directly to the senator, bypassing the party guests, and handed him the freshly printed advance copy of Capital Elite. "Senator," the aide said in a low voice, "the publisher just sent this over via courier. They wanted you to see the feature on the Defense Appropriations Committee, but you need to look at the cover first." Thomas Sterling adjusted his glasses and looked down. The bustling noise of the engagement party seemed to fade into the background as his seasoned political mind processed the image in front of him. There, occupying the entire front cover of the most respected political publication in Washington, was the young woman his future in-laws had just claimed was rotting in a drug rehabilitation clinic. I was wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit, my arms crossed, my expression projecting absolute authority. The bold silver lettering of the headline leaped off the page. Chloe Vance, the government's secret iron wall. The sub-headline detailed my position as the top cybersecurity advisor, managing the most critical defense contracts in the nation. Senator Sterling did not gasp. He did not act confused. He was a man who had spent 30 years navigating the treacherous waters of Washington politics. He knew a lie when he saw one, and he despised being played for a fool. He stared at the glossy image of my face, his jaw tightening, as the sheer magnitude of the Vance family's deception became instantly clear. They had not just lied about a minor detail. They had completely fabricated a vicious, defamatory story about one of the most powerful young women in the federal government. The senator rolled up the magazine and gripped it tightly in his right hand. He signaled to his wife Vivian across the room with a brief, sharp nod. Vivian excused herself from a conversation with Beatrice and moved toward her husband. He showed her the cover. Vivian's sympathetic smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of freezing contempt. Senator Sterling did not wait for the music to stop. He marched straight into the center of the ballroom, his imposing figure parting the crowd of wealthy guests. He walked directly up to Richard, who was mid-sentence boasting about his golf handicap. Richard, Senator Sterling's voice boomed over the string quartet, carrying a tone of absolute chilling authority. The music faltered and stopped. The entire room went dead silent. Everyone turned to look at the senator. Richard blinked, caught off guard by the sudden interruption. "Yes, Thomas, is everything all right?" Senator Sterling held up the advance copy of Capital Elite, slapping the glossy cover with the back of his hand so the entire room could see my face. "You kept this quiet, Richard," the senator said, his voice dripping with pure ice. "Why on earth did you stand there and tell my wife your daughter is in rehab when she is an absolute genius?" Richard stood frozen. The lively string quartet in the background seemed to fade into a dull, distant hum as he stared at the glossy cover thrust against his chest. There, taking up the entire front page of Capital Elite, was his youngest daughter, Chloe. She was not wearing the cheap thrift store clothes Beatrice always claimed she wore. Instead, she stood tall in a sharp, impeccably tailored navy suit. Her arms were crossed, her posture commanding, and her gaze was piercing. The bold, metallic letters screamed the headline for all of Boston high society to see. Chloe Vance, the government's secret iron wall. Beatrice dropped her champagne flute. The expensive crystal shattered against the polished marble floor, splashing bubbling wine all over her designer heels. She did not even flinch. She was entirely paralyzed, her wide eyes locked onto the face of the daughter she had just buried under a mountain of fake addiction rumors. Vanessa physically recoiled, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her mouth in sheer horror. The golden child was suddenly eclipsed not by a minor inconvenience or a bad lighting angle, but by a massive national revelation. The very sister she had deemed a pathetic outcast was currently smiling back at them from the pinnacle of Washington power. Marcus stepped forward, his brow furrowing deeply as he peered over his father's shoulder to get a better look at the magazine. The warm, affectionate gaze he usually reserved for Vanessa hardened instantly into sharp, undeniable confusion. He turned slowly to look at his fiancée. Vanessa Marcus said, his voice low and incredibly steady. "I thought you said Chloe was a high school dropout who fixed laptops out of a dirty basement." Vanessa stammered, her face flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson. The carefully constructed lie she had maintained for 2 entire years was disintegrating in real time right in front of her future in-laws. She stumbled backward, looking frantically at her mother for a lifeline, her mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. "Well, I mean, she had some freelance tech gigs, Marcus. You know how the media always blows things wildly out of proportion to sell copies." Beatrice finally snapped out of her paralyzed shock and leaped aggressively into damage control mode. She forced a high, nervous laugh that echoed awkwardly in the tense silence of the VIP circle. "Oh, Thomas, honestly, you know how these political magazines operate. They love to sensationalize mundane things. Chloe probably just got a minor clerical job answering phones for some government IT department, and they needed a fresh face to feature. She is certainly no genius. We were just trying to spare you the boring details of her entry-level data entry work. It is really nothing to be impressed by." Senator Sterling did not laugh. He did not even crack a polite smile. He lowered the magazine, slowly gripping the spine so tightly his knuckles turned white, and he looked at Beatrice with a gaze so cold it could freeze boiling water. Exaggerating, the senator repeated, his deep voice slicing right through Beatrice's desperate, pathetic excuses. "Beatrice, your daughter is the head of the Cyber Task Force. She personally advises the President of the United States on global digital security. She holds a level of classified security clearance that I, a sitting United States Senator, do not even possess." The silence that followed his declaration was utterly suffocating. The embarrassment radiating from the Vance family was a heavy physical weight in the ballroom. Richard looked like he might genuinely pass out. Beatrice's fake smile vanished completely, replaced by raw, unadulterated humiliation. The elite crowd of politicians and socialites standing around them had completely stopped pretending not to listen. Whispers rippled through the ballroom like wildfire as guests strained their necks to look at the magazine cover. Marcus looked back and forth between his deeply respected parents and the sweating, trembling Vance family. Marcus was a man who had built his entire tech empire on transparency, honor, and absolute trust. He valued integrity above all else. He looked back at Vanessa, his eyes narrowing with a cold, terrifying realization. "You lied to me," Marcus said, his voice entirely devoid of its usual warmth. "You looked me right in the eye yesterday and told me your sister was in a locked rehabilitation center. You said she stole your jewelry to fund her bad habits." Vanessa reached out for his arm, her voice rising in high-pitched panic. "Marcus, baby, please listen to me. I was just trying to protect our family image. She has always been so difficult to deal with, and I did not want her ruining our special weekend with her bad attitude. We were trying to protect you." Marcus pulled his arm away sharply. The physical rejection was so absolute that Vanessa gasped aloud. "Protecting our image by lying about your own flesh and blood," Marcus replied flatly. "What else have you lied about, Vanessa?" The engagement party abruptly lost its celebratory glow. Vivian Sterling signaled for her coat, casting one final look of utter disgust at Beatrice before turning her back on the Vance family. Marcus followed his parents out of the ballroom without saying another word to Vanessa. The golden child was left standing alone in the middle of a shattered champagne glass, her perfect night ruined by the exact person she had tried so desperately to erase. 400 miles away in Washington, I was stepping out of the steaming shower in my apartment, finally washing off the heavy hairspray and gala makeup. I wrapped a thick towel around my hair and walked into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of cold water. The digital clock on my microwave glowed brightly in the dim room. It was exactly 1 a.m. My phone, sitting face up on the marble kitchen island, suddenly lit up and vibrated aggressively against the stone. The caller ID displayed Vanessa's name in glaring white letters. I picked up the device and swiped the screen to answer, holding it to my ear without saying a single word. Before I could even take a breath, Vanessa's voice shrieked through the speaker, raw with absolute panic, fury, and undeniable terror. "What the hell did you do to our family?" I pulled the phone slightly away from my ear as Vanessa shrieked through the speaker. Her voice was shrill and completely devoid of the cultured, soft-spoken persona she had spent the last 2 years perfecting for the Sterling family. "What the hell did you do to our family?" she screamed. I could hear the clinking of glasses and hushed, panicked voices in the background. She had likely locked herself in one of the Boston Harbor Hotel bathrooms to hide from the fallout. Marcus is looking at me like I am a total stranger. His mother refused to even say goodbye to me when they left the ballroom. "Did you pay that magazine to release the issue early just to ruin my engagement party?" I leaned against my kitchen counter and took a slow sip of my ice water. The absolute narcissistic delusion it took for Vanessa to believe the federal government scheduled a national security press release around her engagement party was astounding. "I did not pay anyone, Vanessa," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "I simply did my job. If you look bad right now, it is because you chose to tell your future in-laws I was a drug addict." "You had no right to do an interview without asking permission first," she shot back, completely ignoring her own vicious lies. "You know we have a high-profile image to maintain. Marcus and his parents are interrogating me about why I lied to them. They are old money, Chloe. They value honesty and transparency. You should have cleared this with Dad and me before plastering your face everywhere." The word permission tasted like ash. I set my glass down on the marble island with a sharp clack. "Ask permission," I asked, letting the ice seep into my tone. "Like how you asked permission when you stole my $200,000 college fund to launch your fake lifestyle brand. For years, my parents had gaslit me into believing the money my grandfather left me had simply dried up in a bad stock market crash. It was not until I used my high-level cyber clearance to run a quiet background check that I found the old bank wire transfers. Richard had moved every single cent of my inheritance directly into Vanessa's startup account. I had spent 4 grueling years working graveyard shifts, monitoring server rooms, and scrubbing data drives just to pay my own way through community college. Meanwhile, Vanessa had bought designer handbags and paid Instagram influencers to pretend she was a self-made girl boss. She had built her entire fraudulent empire by standing directly on my neck. "That was family money," Vanessa stammered, her voice shaking with defensive anger. "Mom and Dad gave it to me because they knew my business would succeed. You were just taking basic computer classes. It was a strategic family investment. You are just bringing this up to destroy my happiness because you are miserable and alone." Before I could dismantle her pathetic excuse, the sound of a brief struggle echoed through the phone. A heavy, aggressive sigh signaled that my father had snatched the device from Vanessa's trembling hand. "Chloe, listen to me very carefully," Richard demanded. He was using his commanding CEO voice, the specific tone he used to terrify his employees into submission. "You have caused an absolute disaster tonight. Senator Sterling is demanding answers, and Marcus looks ready to call off the wedding entirely. We are hanging by a thread right now." "Then tell them the truth, Dad," I said. "It is really not that complicated." "We are absolutely not doing that," he snapped. "You are going to book the very first flight out of Washington tomorrow morning. You will be at the post-engagement brunch at the country club by 11. When you get here, you are going to sit down with the Sterlings and tell them the magazine blew your job entirely out of proportion." I stared at the wall, genuinely stunned by his audacity. "You want me to lie to a sitting United States senator about my federal security clearance to cover up your mess?" "I want you to fix the massive problem you created," Richard growled. "Tell them you are just a minor assistant. Tell them you missed the party tonight because you had a severe flu. Tell them the magazine editors exaggerated your role just to sell more copies. Do whatever it takes to downplay this situation. Do not embarrass us, Chloe. If you ruin this marriage for your sister, I will cut you out of this family forever, and I will never forgive you." He was asking me to shrink myself again. He wanted me to strip away my entire career, my entire identity, and my hard-earned respect just to patch up the fragile, superficial lie they had built to trap a wealthy man. A bitter, knowing laugh escaped my lips. I walked over to my home office desk and tapped the spacebar on my laptop. The large monitor glowed to life, illuminating a massive, heavily encrypted file I had been reviewing all week. It was the Vanguard project. The Department of Defense was currently offering a $500 million federal contract to overhaul the military's encrypted communication networks. It was the most lucrative and highly sought-after tech contract of the decade. 4 major technology companies had made it to the final bidding stage. One of those 4 companies was Sterling Secure Systems. The brilliant CEO of that company was Marcus Sterling. My father had absolutely no idea. Vanessa had no idea. They thought Marcus was just a wealthy meal ticket with a famous politician for a father. They did not understand the sheer scale of his business operations, nor did they understand the scale of mine. Marcus Sterling desperately needed the Vanguard contract to push his company into the global stratosphere, and I was the chief risk assessor for the Vanguard project. I was the final wall. I was the exact person who would read every line of code, evaluate every security protocol, and ultimately decide if Marcus's firm received that $500 million or walked away with nothing. My signature was the only thing standing between him and the biggest victory of his professional life. Well, my father barked through the phone, his impatience flaring when I did not respond immediately. Are you going to be at the brunch tomorrow, or are you going to keep being a selfish brat? I smiled, tracing my finger over Marcus Sterling's name on my glowing laptop screen. The power dynamic of our entire family history had just shifted permanently, and Richard was completely oblivious to the hurricane heading straight for him. I will be at the brunch, Dad, I replied, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal calm. I would not miss it for the world. The morning sun broke over the capital, and I prepared for the day with clinical precision. I had taken a secure federal charter flight out of Andrews Air Force Base at sunrise. By 10:30, I was seated in the back of a black armored government SUV, watching the familiar wealthy suburbs of Boston roll past the tinted windows. I was no longer the frightened, marginalized daughter desperately seeking their approval. I was the head of the cyber task force. 2 additional black SUVs followed closely behind mine, carrying my assigned federal security detail. The Boston Country Club was an institution built on old money and generational exclusivity. Its sprawling green lawns and white-pillared clubhouse usually projected an air of relaxed luxury. But this morning, the atmosphere at the corner table of the private dining room was suffocatingly tense. Richard and Beatrice Vance were sweating profusely through their carefully selected pastel brunch attire. They sat across from Senator Thomas Sterling and Vivian Sterling, desperately attempting to perform damage control over plates of untouched eggs, Benedict and cold mimosas. The senator had barely spoken a word since they sat down, and Vivian's icy demeanor was practically freezing the silverware. Vanessa was sitting next to Marcus, her face pale and drawn. She had spent the entire morning trying to spin the magazine cover as a misunderstanding, but the Sterlings were not buying a single word of her desperate routine. Richard was dabbing his sweating forehead with a linen napkin, his heart rate visibly spiking as he anticipated my arrival. When our motorcade pulled past the wrought iron gates of the country club, the entire valet staff froze. Federal license plates and heavily tinted windows did not usually disrupt the quiet Sunday morning routine of the Boston elite. My lead agent stepped out first, his dark suit and earpiece immediately signaling that this was not a standard country club arrival. He opened my door and I stepped out onto the pristine cobblestone driveway. I wore a perfectly tailored charcoal blazer draped over a pristine white silk blouse, paired with sharp trousers and stilettos that clicked assertively against the stone. I looked exactly like the woman on the cover of the magazine. My posture was straight, my expression unbothered. Inside the grand lobby, Beatrice had been anxiously pacing near the coat check, keeping a paranoid watch on the entrance. When she saw the government vehicles pull up and recognized my face through the glass doors, raw panic completely consumed her. She scrambled forward, her heels skidding slightly on the polished hardwood floor, desperate to intercept me before I could reach the dining room and the Sterlings. My security detail immediately stepped forward to block her erratic approach, but I raised a single hand, signaling them to stand down. Beatrice lunged toward me, grabbing my arm with a painful, bruising grip. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide with manic desperation. "Take off that expensive blazer right now!" Beatrice hissed, her voice a frantic, venomous whisper. "You look entirely too flashy." What are you trying to do upstage your sister on her special weekend? I told you what to wear. You are going to ruin everything we have built. You need to look like a low-level clerk. Remember the script we agreed on. You are an assistant. You missed the party because you were sick. Do not embarrass us in front of the senator. Just play along, Chloe. For once in your life, do exactly as you are told. I looked down at her hand clutching my sleeve. For 20 years, that grip, that tone, and those exact words would have shattered my confidence. I would have shrunk myself, apologized, and scrambled to comply. But today, looking at Beatrice Vance, all I saw was a terrified, deeply insecure woman realizing that she had entirely lost control of her favorite victim. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or try to defend myself. I simply looked her dead in the eye with absolute freezing indifference. I smoothly stepped around her, breaking her grip without a single word, and continued walking directly toward the grand dining room. Beatrice let out a strangled gasp, scrambling to follow me as my security detail seamlessly fell into step right behind me, physically separating her from my back. The heavy oak doors of the dining room stood open. As I crossed the threshold, the quiet murmur of the Sunday brunch crowd seemed to instantly evaporate. Heads turned, whispers erupted. I had been on the cover of every newsstand and political broadcast all morning, and the Boston elite were very active readers. I spotted them in this far corner. As I approached the table, the dynamic shifted with violent speed. Marcus Sterling, the brilliant billionaire tech CEO, did not look at me with the polite dismissal one reserves for a troubled, addicted sister. He was not looking at the black sheep of the Vance family. He was looking at the woman who controlled the fate of the nation's most sensitive digital borders. The moment he saw me, he stood up immediately. His chair scraped against the floor, drawing even more attention from the surrounding tables. Marcus bypassed Richard completely. He stepped forward and offered me a firm, deeply respectful handshake. His eyes held a mixture of genuine awe and professional reverence. He was a man who understood power intelligence and the immense weight of the federal infrastructure I managed. Vanessa remained seated, but her entire body was practically vibrating with pure, unadulterated venom. She watched Marcus greet me with the kind of absolute respect he had never once directed toward her own fabricated lifestyle career. Her lies were dead. Her carefully curated victim narrative had been incinerated by my mere presence. I smiled warmly at Marcus, shaking his hand entirely, ignoring the silent, panicked screaming radiating from my father across the table. I took the empty seat directly across from my sister, sitting tall and composed. Vanessa stared at my pristine white silk blouse. She stared at the expensive tailoring of my blazer. She stared at the federal agents standing discreetly near the dining room exit. Her jealousy and rage boiled over into a blinding, irrational surge of spite. Unable to stand the reality of me stealing the spotlight, Vanessa reached for her water glass, but her hand conveniently jerked sideways with forceful intent. She slammed her palm into a completely full, oversized glass of dark red wine, sending the crimson liquid flying straight across the table directly toward my pristine white silk blouse. The dark crimson liquid sailed through the air in a violent arc, aimed directly at my chest. But my reflexes had been honed by years of high-pressure federal training, not superficial country club luncheons. I stepped backward with sharp, calculated precision. The bulk of the heavy red wine splashed violently across the white linen tablecloth, pooling around the fine china and splattering onto the polished hardwood floor. Only a few stray droplets landed harmlessly on the cuff of my dark charcoal blazer, completely missing my pristine white silk blouse. Vanessa immediately brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with exaggerated theatrical horror. She let out a loud, dramatic gasp that echoed across the silent dining room. "Oh my gosh, Chloe!" Vanessa cried out, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I am so terribly clumsy. But then again, you always were an absolute magnet for messes, right?" Beatrice immediately jumped in to support her golden child, desperate to play to the Sterlings and maintain the illusion of their perfect family dynamic. She let out a high, nervous laugh, waving her hand dismissively in the air. "Oh, please forgive her," Vivian Beatrice said, leaning toward the senator's wife. "Chloe was always our little disaster growing up. Dropping plates, failing tests, ruining family photos. You know how some people just attract absolute chaos wherever they go? It is honestly exhausting. The Sterlings did not laugh. They did not even offer a polite, accommodating smile. Vivian Sterling, an elegant, formidable woman who had spent decades navigating the ruthless social politics of Washington, simply stared at Beatrice. She possessed a terrifying, no-nonsense grace that could freeze a room. Without saying a single word to my mother, Vivian calmly picked up a crisp, folded linen napkin from the table. She extended her arm and handed it directly to me, her eyes never leaving Beatrice's sweating face. "It looked like a very deliberate throw to me, Beatrice," Vivian stated. Her voice was quiet, but it carried an icy, absolute disdain that instantly drained the remaining color from my mother's face. Beatrice snapped her mouth shut, utterly mortified. Vanessa shrank back into her chair, realizing entirely too late that her childish, vindictive high school tactics did not work on seasoned political veterans. The power dynamic at the table had just violently shifted, and the Vance women were currently drowning in it. Marcus quickly attempted to ease the suffocating tension that had settled over the table. He turned away from Vanessa and looked directly at me. The confusion and anger he had shown earlier were gone, replaced by a deep, calculating curiosity. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, treating me not as a future sister-in-law, but as a peer. "It is a profound honor to finally meet you, Chloe," Marcus said, his voice steady and respectful. "I read the article this morning. Your work is incredible. My company is actually in the final bidding stages for the Vanguard project down in DC right now." I maintained my composure, meeting his intense gaze perfectly. I smiled sharply, letting the silence stretch for a fraction of a second. "I know, Marcus." Before Marcus could respond to the weight of my statement, my father aggressively inserted himself into the conversation. Richard could not physically tolerate a reality where his scapegoat daughter held the attention and respect of a billionaire CEO. His fragile ego demanded that he tear me down and restore the familiar abusive hierarchy he had enforced my entire life. Richard let out a loud, grating chuckle, leaning over the table to physically block Marcus's view of me. "Marcus, please," Richard interrupted, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly. "Do not bore Chloe with high-level corporate talk. She does not understand any of it. She just pushes papers for some bureaucratic office in the basement of a government building." The magazine editors clearly exaggerated her role for clickbait. "Let us talk about the wedding venue instead. We have a deposit to finalize by Tuesday." I ignored my father entirely. I did not blink. I did not shift my gaze. I kept my eyes locked fiercely onto Marcus, cutting straight through Richard's pathetic attempt at dominance. "Your encryption protocols in Section 4 of your bid are solid, Marcus," I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute lethal authority. "You did exceptional work on the localized node security. However, your back-end server integration relies on a completely outdated framework. If you launch it as is, you would fail the federal beta test within 12 minutes. The entire table went dead silent. Richard's mouth hung open, his arrogant smirk instantly evaporating. Beatrice stared at me as if I had just started speaking a foreign language. Marcus physically recoiled, completely stunned. He dropped his heavy silver fork, letting it clatter loudly against his porcelain plate. The color drained from his face as he stared at me in sheer, unadulterated shock. How Marcus stammered, his usual smooth confidence fracturing. "How do you know the exact details of my highly classified bid?" "That architectural framework is restricted to my top 3 engineers. Not even my board of directors has seen those blueprints yet." Vanessa scoffed loudly, slamming her hands down on the table in a desperate bid to regain control of the narrative. Her face was twisted in an ugly mask of panic and jealousy. "She probably hacked into your laptop, Marcus," Vanessa shrieked, pointing an accusing finger right at my chest. "I told you she was a cyber criminal. She is a menace to this family. You need to call your corporate security team right now and have her arrested. She is trying to ruin your business just to spite me." I did not raise my voice. True power never has to shout. I maintained unyielding eye contact with Marcus. Slowly, deliberately, I reached inside the breast pocket of my tailored blazer. My fingers wrapped around the cold, heavy metal of my security credentials. I pulled out my solid metal federal identification card. The presidential seal gleamed brightly under the crystal chandelier, radiating undeniable authority. I placed the heavy metal card onto the white linen tablecloth and slid it smoothly across the surface. It stopped precisely in front of Marcus's plate. "Because I am the chief risk assessor for the Vanguard project, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, terrifying calm. "I am the one who decides if your company gets the $500 million or not." Marcus stared at the solid metal card resting against the pristine white tablecloth. He did not immediately reach for it. He simply looked at it as if it were an unexploded ordnance sitting beside his coffee cup. Slowly he extended his hand. His fingers traced the raised tactile federal seal embedded in the alloy. He recognized the encrypted microchip and the holographic security markers instantly. As a tech CEO bidding for government contracts, he knew exactly what a legitimate Department of Defense clearance card looked like. He picked it up, feeling the undeniable heavy weight of the government-issued credential. He read the embossed lettering aloud, his voice devoid of any inflection, carrying a hollow echo of complete realization. Chief Risk Assessor, Project Vanguard, Department of Defense. The blood drained from Richard and Beatrice's faces with such synchronicity, they looked like twin ghosts. The smug, condescending masks they had worn for decades melted away, leaving behind raw, unfiltered panic. The realization that I was not a lowly clerk, but the absolute gatekeeper to the Sterling family's $500 million future crashed down upon them like a collapsing building. The power dynamic of the entire table inverted in a fraction of a second. Vanessa shattered the suffocating silence. "It is fake," Vanessa shrieked. Her voice hit a pitch so shrill it caused a few patrons at nearby tables to physically flinch. She lunged forward, her manicured finger pointing aggressively at the metal card in Marcus's hand. She printed it online. "You can buy anything on the dark web these days. Marcus, do not be an idiot. Look at her. She is wearing a cheap suit trying to play dress-up. Tell them, Dad. Tell them she is lying." Vanessa was unraveling rapidly. The perfectly curated, soft-spoken socialite persona was entirely gone, replaced by the vicious, panicked bully I had grown up with. She was entirely unable to process a reality where I held any form of power, let alone the power to dictate her fiancé's professional destiny. Her desperate attempt to maintain her false superiority was pathetic to witness. Richard scrambled to catch the lifeline his favorite daughter had thrown him. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically above his tight silk tie. He forced a sickeningly patronizing smile onto his face and turned toward the senator, completely bypassing Marcus. He leaned back in his chair, attempting to project the calm, authoritative aura of a seasoned CEO dealing with a minor unfortunate inconvenience. "Senator Marcus, please excuse my daughter's delusions," Richard said, letting out a heavy, theatrical sigh. He shot me a look of pure, concentrated venom before turning his faux sympathetic gaze back to the Sterlings. "We did not want to air our dirty laundry in public, but Chloe has always had a severe inferiority complex regarding Vanessa. It is a tragedy, really. She creates these elaborate fantasies to cope with her own inadequacies. She probably saw a news segment about this Vanguard project and decided to insert herself into the narrative to get attention. Please let us just move past this embarrassing display. Let us talk about the wedding venue. We have a deposit to finalize by Tuesday." Richard reached for his water glass, his hand trembling so violently that the ice clinked loudly against the crystal. He took a sip, desperately trying to project nonchalance, completely oblivious to the lethal storm gathering right across from him. He genuinely believed his corporate charm and decades of practiced gaslighting would work. He thought he could simply speak his reality into existence and force everyone else to accept it, just as he had done within the walls of our family home for my entire life. I remained completely silent. I did not need to defend myself. True power never has to shout to be heard. Senator Thomas Sterling did not say a word. He did not blink. He slowly reached forward and picked up his own linen napkin, placing it neatly beside his plate. Then, without any warning whatsoever, he brought his large, heavy hand down flat against the solid oak dining table. The sharp, thunderous crack echoed through the entire dining room like a gunshot. The sound was so violent that Beatrice actually shrieked, clutching her chest in terror. The surrounding tables, which had been buzzing with hushed Sunday gossip, went completely terrifyingly silent. The string quartet in the corner abruptly stopped playing mid-note. You could hear a pin drop in the expansive, luxurious room. "Do you take me for a fool?" Richard the senator growled. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a terrifying low-frequency rumble that commanded absolute submission. Richard choked on his water, coughing violently into his napkin. "Senator, I assure you I was simply trying to explain the situation." "Do not speak!" Sterling commanded, slicing his hand through the air with military precision. "You do not get to speak anymore. You have spent this entire brunch attempting to insult my intelligence, and I have absolutely reached my limit." The senator leaned forward, his imposing frame casting a long, dark shadow over the center of the table. He looked at Richard with a level of pure disgust, usually reserved for toxic waste. Vivian sat beside her husband, her posture impeccably straight, watching the Vance family crumble with cold satisfaction. "When I saw that magazine cover this morning, I did not just read the article, Richard. I am a sitting member of the United States Senate. I have resources you cannot even begin to comprehend. I made exactly one phone call to my chief of staff. I had my team do a full background check on your family." Beatrice let out a tiny, strangled whimper. Her hands shook violently as she gripped the padded armrests of her plush chair. The superficial high society facade she had guarded with her life was being systematically dismantled by the very man she had spent months trying to impress. Vanessa sat completely frozen, her eyes darting frantically between Marcus and his father, finally realizing the catastrophic scale of the disaster unfolding around her. Her breathing grew shallow and rapid as the walls closed in. "I know everything," the senator continued, his voice echoing in the absolute silence of the room. "I know about the quiet federal inquiries into your business practices. I know about Chloe's flawless academic record that you actively tried to bury and ignore. I know about the high-level cyber task force. I know about the federal clearances she holds. But more importantly, Richard, I know about the financial discrepancies hidden in your personal accounts." Richard's face transformed from a pale ghost to a sickly mottled gray. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some kind of desperate defense, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He sat there, a broken, terrified man, finally facing a real power he could not manipulate, bribe, or intimidate. The senator did not break eye contact. He glared at my father with unyielding, righteous fury. "I know exactly what you did to this brilliant young woman," Senator Sterling said, letting the words hang in the heavy air like a judge delivering a final, inescapable sentence. "And I know about the stolen college fund. And I know about the stolen college fund." The words hung suspended in the chilled air of the country club dining room, heavy and absolute. Marcus turned his head with a slow, deliberate motion. His gaze shifted from the imposing figure of his father to the man he had been prepared to call his father-in-law. The polite confusion that had previously clouded his face rapidly morphed into a dark, unsettled dread. The warm, affectionate man who had entered this brunch was gone, replaced entirely by the ruthless, analytical CEO who had built a billion-dollar empire. "What college fund?" Marcus demanded. His voice was no longer the polished, accommodating tone of a society groom. It was a sharp, uncompromising command that demanded immediate truth. Senator Sterling did not break his withering eye contact with Richard. He let the suffocating silence stretch, allowing the sheer weight of his disgust to settle over the table and suffocate the Vance family. "The $200,000 trust left to Chloe by her late grandfather," the senator stated, his deep voice ringing with terrifying clarity. "My investigators followed the paper trail, Richard. It was not a particularly difficult task for federal agents. You and your wife drained that account the very week Chloe turned 18. You funneled every single cent into a private shell company, which then miraculously became the initial seed money for Vanessa's highly publicized lifestyle brand." The atmosphere in the room shifted violently. The quiet, polite murmurs of the surrounding elite patrons had ceased entirely. Every single person in the private dining room was now actively listening, watching the complete and total destruction of the Vance family's carefully curated social standing. Richard's face transformed from a pale, terrified ghost to a sickly mottled gray. He opened his mouth desperately, gasping for air like a fish thrown onto dry land, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He sat there, a broken, exposed fraud, finally facing a real, tangible power he could not manipulate, bribe, or intimidate. Beatrice slumped back in her chair, her hands trembling so violently that her heavy diamond bracelets clattered loudly against the wooden armrests. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands flat on the polished mahogany table. The white silk of my blouse remained pristine, a stark physical contrast to the ugly, messy truth spilling out across the table. I looked directly at Marcus, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over me. The years of gaslighting, the years of being told I was crazy or ungrateful, were finally being incinerated in the light of day. "That is right, Marcus," I said, my voice steady, perfectly measured, and devoid of any lingering hurt. "Your self-made fiancée built her entire fraudulent empire on money stolen from an 18-year-old girl. While she was paying high-profile Instagram influencers to pretend she started her lucrative business from scratch in a dirty garage, I was working grueling night shifts as a janitor. I spent 4 years scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans in commercial office buildings just to pay my way through basic community college classes." Vanessa shattered. The poise and elegance she had spent years aggressively cultivating evaporated in a single devastating instant. She let out a loud, ugly sob, burying her face in her hands before snapping her head up to glare at me. Tears streamed down her cheeks, ruining her expensive, carefully applied makeup. Dark streaks of mascara ran down toward her jawline, making her look frantic and entirely unhinged. "I did not know," Vanessa wailed, her voice echoing shrilly in the tense dining room. She reached out her manicured fingers, grabbing frantically at the sleeve of Marcus's tailored suit jacket. "Marcus, you have to believe me. Mom and Dad just gave me the money. They told me it was an early inheritance. They told me they believed in my vision and wanted to invest in my future as a female entrepreneur." She whipped her head toward me, her eyes flashing with the desperate, cornered rage of a trapped animal. The mask was gone, and the vicious, selfish sister I had known my entire life was fully exposed. "Chloe is just doing this to ruin my happiness!" Vanessa shrieked, pointing an accusing, trembling finger across the table. "She has always been deeply jealous of me. She is bringing this up right now because she is miserable and completely alone, and she absolutely cannot stand to see me successful and loved by someone like you." Beatrice tried to lean over and comfort Vanessa, her hands fluttering uselessly around her daughter's shoulders, whispering frantic, hushed apologies that only made the situation look more pathetic. Richard stared at his untouched plate of food, completely emasculated and stripped of all his corporate bravado. Marcus did not comfort Vanessa. He did not reach out to wipe away her dramatic tears, nor did he offer a single reassuring word. He looked down at her hands, desperately clutching his expensive jacket, and a profound, chilling disgust washed over his sharp features. The illusion of the sweet, hard-working, honest woman he thought he loved was completely dead, replaced by the reality of a spoiled, manipulative thief who had built her life by standing on her own sister's neck. Marcus smoothly but firmly detached her trembling fingers from his clothing. He pushed his chair back and stood up. His imposing height dominated the space, casting a shadow over the weeping woman below him. The silence stretched again, growing so tight and heavy, it felt like a physical pressure pressing against the walls of the room. He looked down at the woman he had intended to marry, his eyes dark and entirely void of affection. "If you did not know," Vanessa, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low, lethal register that demanded absolute attention. "If you were completely innocent in all of this financial theft, why did you look me in the eye and tell my mother yesterday that Chloe was a drug addict in a locked rehabilitation center?" Vanessa's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. She looked wildly around the room, her eyes darting from Marcus's icy glare to Senator Sterling's hardened expression. The suffocating weight of Marcus's question hung in the air, demanding an answer she could not possibly provide without incriminating herself further. Her perfectly manicured nails dug so deeply into the white linen tablecloth that her knuckles turned a stark white. Finally, her terrified gaze snapped to our mother, silently begging for a lifeline, relying entirely on the woman who had spent the last 20 years sweeping her toxic messes under the rug. Beatrice, ever the master manipulator, immediately leaped into the fray to protect her primary investment. She plastered on a mask of deep maternal sorrow, pressing her diamond-ringed hand against her chest, as if physically wounded by the very accusation. She forced her voice to tremble, attempting to project the image of a heartbroken mother burdened by an impossible family secret. "Marcus, you have to understand the context." Beatrice pleaded, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. "We did not want to burden you with the ugly details of our private family struggles, especially not during such a joyous weekend. Chloe has always harbored an incredibly toxic energy. We only told Vivian that she was in a facility to protect you and your wonderful family from her erratic behavior. We were terrified she would cause a scene and ruin this brunch. She is simply socially unfit for your world. We were just trying to shield you from her instability." I did not raise my voice to defend myself against the absolute assassination of my character. I did not need to shout down Beatrice's practiced desperate lies, nor did I need to display the hurt that such a betrayal would normally inflict. My high-pressure career had trained me to operate with clinical detachment during a crisis. I simply reached into the pocket of my tailored charcoal blazer and withdrew my personal phone. I unlocked the screen with a single deliberate swipe, opened my saved audio files, and turned the volume to its absolute maximum setting. I placed the phone flat on the table, resting it right next to the pool of spilled red wine that Vanessa had weaponized only moments earlier. I pressed play. Beatrice's sharp, grating voice immediately filled the silent dining room, completely stripped of all the fake maternal warmth and sorrow she had just displayed for the Sterlings. The recording was crystal clear, capturing the exact vicious tone she used whenever doors were closed and cameras were off. "Listen to me very carefully, Chloe," the recorded voice spat out across the table. "Vanessa is marrying into a billionaire political family this weekend. The Sterlings are practically royalty in this city. We absolutely cannot have you showing up looking like trash and ruining her carefully planned aesthetic. You do not fit the image we are presenting to them today. You are officially uninvited from the wedding and all associated events. If anyone asks, you are at a wellness retreat. Do not embarrass us by showing your face." I tapped the screen instantly, cutting off the recording. I looked directly at Beatrice, my expression a mask of frozen calm. The silence that followed was suffocating. The absolute hypocrisy of her previous statement hung in the air, completely incinerated by the reality of her own recorded words. She had not been protecting the Sterlings from my toxic energy. She had been protecting her own superficial, highly prejudiced image of perfection. Vivian Sterling had sat quietly through the entire explosive exchange, observing the Vance family's implosion with the calculating, ruthless precision of a seasoned political strategist. She had navigated Washington's elite circles for decades, destroying political opponents with half the effort it took to deal with my mother. But the audio recording pushed her over the absolute edge. The sheer, unabashed vanity of my mother's words, coupled with the cruel, underlying classism and racism implied in their desperate need to perform for a powerful, established African-American family, struck a deeply personal and offensive nerve. Vivian placed her hands flat on the table and stood up. Her posture was rigidly perfect, radiating a terrifying, regal authority that instantly commanded the entire dining room. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as she fixed her intense, unwavering gaze squarely on my mother. Beatrice physically shrank back into her padded chair, visibly withered by the sheer force of Vivian's absolute disdain. "You thought our family would care more about aesthetics than family loyalty?" Vivian asked, her voice dangerously quiet and sharp as a scalpel. "You honestly believe that we, a family that fought through generations of systemic adversity to build our wealth and political standing in this country, would value a superficial, curated image over actual human integrity?" Beatrice opened her mouth, a pathetic squeak escaping her throat as she attempted to stutter an apology, but Vivian cut her off with a single slicing motion of her hand. "Do not insult me further by attempting to speak," Vivian commanded, her tone brooking absolutely no defiance. "You deemed your own brilliant, accomplished daughter socially unfit because she did not fit into a shallow, fabricated narrative. You stole her future to fund a lie, and then you had the audacity to sit at my table, drink my champagne, and look me in the eye while trying to sell me that exact same lie. We built our legacy on integrity, Mrs. Vance, something you clearly lack. The absolute finality in Vivienne's voice was the death knell for the Vance family's high society ambitions. The Sterling alliance was completely dead, incinerated by their own unmitigated greed and profound arrogance. Richard sat paralyzed, watching the entire exchange with mounting visceral horror. He could vividly see the $500 million Vanguard federal contract, the immense political prestige, and the generational wealth of the Sterling family slipping through his greedy fingers like dry sand. His entire carefully constructed world was collapsing around his ears, and he knew exactly who was dragging him down into the abyss. My father possessed absolutely no true loyalty to anyone but himself. He operated purely on self-preservation, financial gain, and calculated ruthlessness. Seeing that Beatrice and Vanessa were rapidly sinking ships, completely and permanently destroyed in the eyes of the senator and his formidable wife, Richard, made a desperate, vicious pivot to save his own skin. He realized he needed a scapegoat to survive the fallout, and for the first time in his entire life, he did not choose me. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto his golden child. The indulgent, fiercely protective father vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, cornered executive looking for a way out. Vanessa Richards snarled, his voice dripping with sudden venomous disgust, as he threw his favorite daughter to the wolves. "How could you do this to your sister?" "Marcus, Senator, please," Richard begged, raising his trembling hands in a pathetic, desperate gesture of surrender. This was all Vanessa's doing. She begged us not to invite Chloe this weekend. She forced us to lie about the rehabilitation center. She manipulated her mother and me into a corner. We were just trying to support our daughter's dreams, but she took advantage of our generosity. She demanded that money for her company and threatened to cut us out of her life entirely if we did not provide the seed capital. We are victims here, Senator. We were blinded by a father and mother's love for a deeply troubled child. Vanessa stared at her father in sheer, unadulterated horror. The breath left her lungs in a sharp, audible gasp. For her entire 28 years on this earth, she had been the undisputed golden child of the Vance household. She had been shielded from every consequence, praised for every mediocre achievement, and explicitly taught that the rules did not apply to her. Her parents had carefully molded her into their perfect high society asset, spoiling her rotten while simultaneously using her as a weapon to tear me down. Now, with the Sterling family's immense wealth and political prestige rapidly evaporating before their very eyes, the parents who had worshipped the ground she walked on were violently throwing her to the wolves. They were sacrificing their favorite daughter without a single second of hesitation just to save their own proximity to power. "Dad, how could you?" Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking with genuine agonizing betrayal. Her perfectly styled hair was clinging to her wet cheeks. "I did not force you to do anything. You told me the money was mine. You told me Chloe did not need it because she was just going to drop out anyway. You signed the transfer papers. You set up the shell corporation for me. You did all of it." She whipped her head toward our mother, her eyes wide and pleading for salvation. "Mom, tell them. Tell them it was Dad's idea to move the trust fund. Tell them I did not know it was stolen." Beatrice did not look at her golden child. My mother, the woman who had spent decades enabling Vanessa's absolute worst behaviors, simply stared down at her lap. Her hands were clamped tightly together, her knuckles white. She was calculating her own survival, realizing that aligning with her disgraced daughter was a social death sentence. By refusing to meet Vanessa's eyes, Beatrice finalized the absolute betrayal. The golden child was entirely alone. I stood silently at the edge of the table, slowly crossing my arms over my chest. I did not gloat. I did not raise my voice to add to the chaos. I simply watched the magnificent, terrifying implosion of the Vance family dynamic. For 20 years, they had operated as a unified, toxic front. They had bonded over their shared disdain for me, using me as the designated scapegoat to distract from their own profound moral failings. I was the dark cloud that made their fake sunlight look brighter. But now, stripped of their scapegoat and exposed to the unforgiving light of the Sterling's absolute integrity, they had absolutely nothing left holding them together. The dominoes were falling with spectacular speed, and they were actively, viciously destroying each other to avoid the wreckage. Vivienne Sterling watched the spectacle with an expression of pure, unyielding revulsion. She stepped closer to her husband, her posture rigid. She did not say another word, clearly deeming the Vance family entirely unworthy of any further breath. Marcus remained standing, his broad shoulders tense. He looked at Vanessa not with anger, but with a profound, chilling emptiness. The woman he had loved, the future he had planned, had been nothing more than a carefully constructed mirage. "Marcus, please," Vanessa sobbed, reaching out a trembling hand toward him again. Her voice was a pathetic, broken whine. "I love you. You know I love you. My parents are lying. They are monsters. They set me up. We can still fix this. We can get married. I will give the money back to Chloe. I promise. Just do not leave me." Marcus slowly shook his head, taking a deliberate step backward, placing physical distance between himself and her grasping hands. "You do not love me, Vanessa," Marcus said, his voice completely devoid of warmth. "You love the safety I provide. You love my family's name. You love the aesthetic of a billionaire husband. But there is absolutely nothing genuine inside you. You let your own sister scrub floors to pay for community college while you built a fraudulent brand on her stolen inheritance. And when she finally achieved success on her own merit, you tried to convince my family she was a drug addict just to protect your spotlight. We are entirely done. Do not ever contact me again." The finality of his words struck Vanessa like a physical blow. She slumped back into her chair, her entire body shaking. The wedding was canceled. The sterling wealth was gone. The prestige the magazine covers, the carefully curated social media empire, all of it was dead. She looked up, her tear-streaked face twisting into a mask of pure, concentrated fury. She looked at Richard, who was still trying to subtly signal the senator, still desperately attempting to salvage some shred of corporate grace. Vanessa realized she was completely cornered, utterly betrayed by the very people who had created her. She had absolutely nothing left to lose. And if she was going down, she had just decided she was dragging every single one of them down with her. She slammed her palms onto the table and pushed herself up, glaring at my father with a hatred so intense it made the air crackle. "Do not pretend you care about Marcus!" Vanessa screamed, her voice tearing through the dining room like a siren. "Do not pretend you care about my happiness or his family's legacy. You never cared about the Sterlings. You only want me to marry him because your precious manufacturing company is $10 million in debt. You have been cooking the books for 3 years, and you desperately need the Sterling family to bail you out before the federal auditors figure it out." The words had barely left Vanessa's mouth before the remaining color violently drained from Richard's face, only to be instantly replaced by a dark, mottled purple. The suffocating silence of the private dining room was broken only by the sound of his ragged, shallow breathing. The meticulously maintained mask of the sophisticated, untouchable Boston CEO shattered entirely, revealing the vicious, desperate man beneath. His entire empire, built on fraudulent loans, stolen inheritance, and smoke, had just been laid bare in front of the single most powerful family in Massachusetts. If the Sterlings knew about the $10 million debt, there would be no corporate bailout. There would only be federal auditors' bankruptcy and likely a prison sentence. His entire body shook with an explosive, uncontrolled rage. With a guttural, animalistic roar, Richard lunged across the spilled red wine and the scattered fine china. His large hand raised high in the air, his fingers curled into a rigid strike aimed directly at Vanessa's face. He intended to physically silence his golden child, reverting to the only method he knew when his back was completely against the wall. I did not flinch. I sat perfectly still in my chair, my posture immaculate, my hands resting lightly on my lap. I had seen that exact terrifying shade of purple before. I recognized the sudden violent shift in the air pressure. I remembered being 16 years old, standing in his pristine mahogany home office, holding a report card with a single B+ in advanced calculus. I remembered the heavy crystal whiskey tumbler shattering against the wall mere inches from my head, the glass shards raining down on my shoulders as he screamed about my incompetence and how I was a stain on the Vance family legacy. Physical violence had always been Richard Vance's ultimate fallback when his intellect failed him. and he lost control of his carefully curated narrative. He governed his household by fear, and right now he was terrified beyond rational thought. But this was not his private home office, and he was no longer dealing with a frightened teenage girl who could be bullied into submission. Before Richard's heavy hand could make contact with Vanessa's tear-streaked cheek, a blur of motion intercepted him. Marcus moved with terrifying athletic speed. He stepped smoothly and decisively into the space between father and daughter. His large hand shot out, clamping down around Richard's raised wrist like an industrial steel vise. The sickening sharp crack of Richard's momentum being violently halted echoed through the quiet dining room. Richard gasped, his eyes bulging in shock as he tried to yank his arm back, but Marcus held him completely immobilized. Senator Sterling had also risen half out of his chair, his polished political demeanor instantly replaced by the protective, commanding presence of a man ready to physically intervene, but his son had already neutralized the threat. Vivian Sterling remained seated, her eyes narrowed in absolute unrelenting disgust as she watched a grown man attempt to strike his own daughter over a failed financial scam. Marcus twisted his grip just a fraction of an inch. Richard let out a sharp, pathetic yelp of pain, his knees buckling slightly under the immense pressure applied to his wrist. With a single forceful shove, Marcus threw my father backward. Richard stumbled clumsily, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the wine-soaked hardwood floor, and crashed heavily back into his dining chair. The wooden frame groaned in protest under the sudden impact. "Do not you ever raise your hand to a woman in my presence," Marcus growled. His voice was no longer just authoritative. It was laced with a lethal, absolute warning that vibrated through the floorboards. "You have disgraced yourself, Richard. You are a fraud, a thief, and a coward. Do not make the mistake of thinking you can bring your domestic abuse into the daylight and walk away intact." Beatrice was sobbing openly now, her face buried in her hands, rocking back and forth in her chair. The entire illusion of their elite, untouchable family had been burned to the ground in less than 20 minutes. The patrons at the surrounding tables were staring openly, some holding their phones, undoubtedly texting every major socialite and business reporter in the greater Boston area. The Vance name was officially irreparably dead. Vanessa sat shivering in her chair, staring up at the man who had just physically protected her from their father. A tiny spark of misplaced, delusional hope flared in her wide, panicked eyes. Her narcissism was so deeply ingrained that she truly believed his intervention meant he still cared for her. She thought she still had a chance to salvage the Sterling empire, the private jets, and the billionaire lifestyle she felt she was owed. She reached out, her voice a desperate, trembling whisper. "Marcus, you saved me." Vanessa wept, leaning toward him. "You see what they are like. You see what I have had to live with. They forced me to take that money. They manipulated me. Take me away from them. We can still be together. We can fix this." Marcus did not even look down at her. The disgust rolling off him was palpable. He simply reached over to his left hand. Slowly, methodically, he twisted the heavy custom platinum engagement ring off his finger. The expensive metal slid free, catching the bright light of the crystal chandeliers above us. He dropped it flat onto the center of the ruined table. The dull, heavy thud of the ring hitting the wood sounded exactly like a judge's gavel dropping on a casket. "It is over," Vanessa Marcus said, his voice flat and completely devoid of emotion. "Have your assistant send my legal team an itemized list for the return of your ring and any remaining assets. Do not attempt to contact my personal numbers again." Vanessa let out a strangled, breathless wail, finally realizing that the life she had planned, the status she had stolen for, was gone forever. The Sterling family was officially severing all ties. She buried her face in her arms on the table, weeping hysterically into the puddle of spilled red wine. Marcus turned his back on the smoking ruins of the Vance family. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit jacket, his composure snapping back into place with practiced ease. He looked across the table, his sharp, intelligent eyes bypassing the sobbing women and the hyperventilating, defeated man in the corner, locking directly on to me. The anger in his gaze had vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, calculating professional respect. He had just watched his entire personal life explode in spectacular fashion, yet his brilliant mind was already shifting gears, analyzing the new data, recognizing the true power player in the room. He walked around the edge of the large circular table, stepping carefully over the mess, until he stood right beside my chair. He looked down at me, treating me as an equal. "Did you know his company was bankrupt?" I looked at Marcus. The raw, burning anger that had previously hardened his handsome features had vanished entirely, replaced by a razor-sharp analytical focus. He was no longer looking at me as the estranged, problematic sister of his disgraced fiancé. He was looking at me as a peer, studying my completely unbothered demeanor with a profound and sudden respect. He recognized the shift in the room's power dynamic, and he was waiting for my move. I shifted my gaze from the billionaire heir standing beside me to the broken, hyperventilating man slumped heavily in the ruined dining chair. Richard was staring at Marcus in pure shock, his chest heaving. "I did not just know Marcus," I stated, my voice ringing out across the silent dining room with absolute, undeniable authority. "My department was the one auditing his firm for a federal bailout grant." Richard let out a sharp, agonizing gasp. His hands flew up to grasp at his chest, his thick fingers twisting into the expensive fabric of his tailored suit jacket right over his violently racing heart. The mottled purple color of his face drained away in a single second, leaving him looking like a sickly, terrified ghost. His eyes widened to the size of saucers, the whites completely bloodshot as the sheer magnitude of my words finally penetrated his panic. He stopped breathing entirely, paralyzed by a terror so profound it seemed to anchor him to the floorboards. For the last 8 months, Vance Manufacturing had been secretly and catastrophically bleeding cash. Richard had heavily leveraged his primary factories and machinery to fund a highly illegal series of offshore investments. When those incredibly risky investments tanked, he was left holding a toxic bag of $10 million in debt. Desperate to maintain his lavish lifestyle, desperate to keep Beatrice swathed in diamonds, and terrified of losing his untouchable status in Boston high society, he had quietly applied for a massive federal relief grant. It was a program specifically designed by the government to rescue struggling domestic manufacturers who had been legitimately impacted by recent global supply chain disruptions. Richard had hired the most expensive, morally flexible corporate accountants in the city to completely doctor his ledgers. He thought he had brilliantly fooled the federal government. He honestly believed he was outsmarting a building full of faceless, incompetent bureaucrats who would just rubber stamp his application and hand him millions of taxpayer dollars to cover his criminal tracks. He had absolutely no idea that the estranged daughter he had kicked out of his home, the daughter he openly mocked for attending community college, was the one holding the magnifying glass to his fraudulent empire. He had spent years telling everyone I was a failure, a janitor, a drug addict, and a permanent stain on his pristine legacy. Meanwhile, I had transferred my hard-earned community college credits, secured a full academic scholarship to Georgetown University, earned my master's degree in forensic accounting, and systematically climbed the grueling ranks of the federal government. I was now a senior financial investigator for the oversight committee assigned to his exact case file. He thought I was scrubbing toilets, but I was the lead auditor holding the key to his prison cell. "You!" Richard wheezed, his voice sounding like dry leaves crushing together. His chest heaved violently as he desperately tried to pull oxygen into his lungs. "You were the lead auditor." I leaned slowly over the polished mahogany table, placing both of my hands flat against the wood. I loomed over him, letting him feel the absolute suffocating weight of my authority. I was no longer the frightened teenager ducking flying glass in his home office. I was his executioner. "You lied on your tax returns for the past 5 years, Dad," I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet, ensuring every single syllable carried absolute lethal intent. Senator Sterling and Vivian were watching me with intense, undisguised admiration, witnessing a masterclass in professional destruction. "You claimed offshore accounts as domestic losses. You funneled company payroll funds into a private Cayman Islands account to pay for Vanessa's fake lifestyle brand, and then you wrote it off as a legitimate business expense. You created 3 different phantom shell corporations to hide the bleeding. You thought you were so smart, you thought you were untouchable. Beatrice let out a high-pitched, terrified wail that echoed shrilly off the crystal chandeliers. She scrambled frantically out of her chair, backing away from the table as if Richard was suddenly contagious. The reality of federal tax evasion and wire fraud was crashing down on her carefully lifted face. She knew exactly what this meant. It meant the immediate seizure of the Beacon Hill mansion. It meant the end of the country club memberships, the designer clothes, the charity galas, and the summer homes. It meant complete, unmitigated poverty and a permanent exile from the society she worshipped. Vanessa was still sobbing hysterically into the ruined tablecloth, her mind entirely broken by the loss of Marcus and the sterling billions. She was completely useless, a hollow shell of vanity that had just been crushed into dust by the very system that had elevated her. Richard tried to speak, tried to formulate some sort of defense, some manipulative lie to spin his way out of the corner, but his mouth just opened and closed silently. He was experiencing the ultimate terrifying realization that he had absolutely zero control. The power dynamic had completely inverted. The daughter he threw away like garbage held his entire life in the palm of her hand. "You have to help me, Chloe." Richard finally choked out, his arrogance entirely shattered. He reached a trembling, sweaty hand toward me across the table, his eyes begging for a mercy he had never once shown me. "I am your father. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. I will give you anything. I will make you a full partner at the firm. I will fire Vanessa. Just approve the grant. We can fix the ledgers. We can keep this quiet. I will pay you." The sheer audacity of his request, the pathetic desperation of a man trying to blatantly bribe a federal investigator who also happened to be the daughter he abused, was the final nail in his coffin. I stood up straight, smoothing down the front of my pristine white blouse. I looked at him with an expression of pure clinical detachment, feeling a profound and beautiful sense of closure. "I officially denied your grant application yesterday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon," I stated, delivering the absolute killing blow with a voice as cold as ice. "The IRS investigation begins on Monday." The absolute reality of total, inescapable ruin settled over the table like a suffocating lead blanket. Richard's mouth hung open, his chest barely moving as his brain short-circuited, trying to process the sheer magnitude of his destruction. He was trapped. There were no loopholes left to exploit, no high-priced corporate lawyers who could magically uncook the charred remains of his financial ledgers, and certainly no federal bailout money coming to save his fraudulent empire. He slumped back into his chair, a broken, defeated shell of the tyrant who had terrorized our household for decades. But it was Beatrice who broke first. The polished, unyielding matriarch who had spent the last 20 years treating me like an embarrassing stain on her pristine Persian rugs completely unraveled. She let out a guttural, pathetic wail that entirely stripped away every ounce of her carefully cultivated high society dignity. She lunged forward, practically falling out of her chair, and dropped heavily onto her knees, right there on the wine-stained hardwood floor. She crawled toward me, her expensive silk designer dress soaking up the spilled alcohol, her heavy diamond bracelets clanking loudly against the floorboards. Before I could step back, she threw her arms out and grabbed my hand, clutching it with a desperate, terrifying grip. "Chloe, baby, please," Beatrice sobbed, looking up at me with dark mascara running in ugly rivers down her pale cheeks. "You are my daughter. You cannot do this to us. You cannot let them send your father to federal prison. We gave you life. We raised you in a beautiful home. You have to stop this audit. You have to fix this for us." I looked down at the woman kneeling at my feet. I did not feel a single shred of pity. I did not feel the familiar, desperate childhood urge to comfort her and beg for a scrap of her affection. My eyes were like ice staring into the face of a woman who had never been a mother to me in any way that actually mattered. "You gave me life," I said, my voice eerily calm, the words echoing sharply off the high ceilings of the private dining room. "And then you left me completely alone in a sterile hospital waiting room when I was 16 years old. My appendix had ruptured. The doctors told you it was a severe, life-threatening emergency requiring immediate surgery. Do you remember what you did, Beatrice?" She flinched violently, her grip on my hand loosening just a fraction, but she did not let go. She kept shaking her head back and forth, trying to deny the memory, desperately trying to push away the ugly truth of her own monstrous parenting. I remember I continued enunciating every single word, so it would burn into her memory forever. You looked at the attending surgeon. You looked at me sweating and screaming in pure agony on a hospital gurney, and you told the staff you had to leave because Vanessa had a regional cheerleading competition, and she would be absolutely heartbroken if you missed her routine. You walked out of the emergency room. You left me to go into major surgery entirely alone. I woke up in a recovery ward 48 hours later, completely terrified, and you were not there. You did not show up until the next afternoon because you were busy taking Vanessa out for celebratory ice cream. Do not you dare kneel there on the floor and play the mother card with me now. Vanessa, who had been weeping into the table, jerked her head up. Her face was red and bloated. Even now, facing complete financial devastation and the loss of her billionaire fiancé, her ego could not handle the exposure of her own past privilege. She opened her mouth to argue, to somehow spin the hospital story into a narrative where she was the victim, but Beatrice's next words cut her off completely. Beatrice let out another loud, wrenching sob, her face burying into the fabric of my tailored charcoal blazer. She was shaking, uncontrollably cornered by the undeniable reality of her own historical cruelty. In her absolute desperation to justify her monstrous favoritism to me and to the Sterlings, watching in horror, she inadvertently spat out the exact ugly truth she had hidden behind fake smiles and gaslighting for my entire life. I had to. Beatrice cried out, her voice raw and shrilly echoing across the room. Vanessa needed me. She was always so fragile, Chloe. She could not handle disappointment or stress or failure. She needed constant reassurance. You were always so strong. You were independent and tough from the day you were born. You figured things out on your own. You did not need us the way she did. I had to protect her. Vanessa let out a strangled gasp, utterly mortified. Being called fragile and weak in front of Marcus Sterling was the ultimate humiliation for a woman who had spent years crafting an image of a fierce, self-made entrepreneur. The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of my mother's confession hung in the air, heavy and toxic. She had just admitted to actively punishing her youngest child for being resilient, while heavily rewarding and enabling the eldest for being weak, manipulative, and entirely dependent. She had penalized my independence and funded Vanessa's endless vanity. Marcus stood quietly a few feet away, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the scene unfold with a hard, uncompromising expression. Senator Sterling and Vivian remained seated, their faces masks of pure disgust, as they witnessed a mother literally begging the daughter she had severely abused to save her from federal prison. They were watching a masterclass in generational dysfunction reach its absolute breaking point. I looked down at Beatrice's manicured hands, her diamond-ringed fingers clutching the expensive fabric of my blazer like a drowning woman clinging to a life raft. She was trembling, holding her breath, waiting for me to break. She was waiting for the strong, independent daughter to swoop in, take the burden and save the family one last time, just as she had always expected me to absorb their collateral damage. I slowly reached down. I grabbed her wrists, my grip firm, steady, and utterly unyielding. I did not rush the movement. I methodically pried her trembling fingers off my clothing, peeling her away from me, with the exact same cold, clinical detachment she had shown me my entire life. I let her hands drop heavily back down to her sides. "You are right," I said, my voice a quiet, lethal whisper that sliced cleanly through her sobbing. "I never needed you, and now you have nothing." The heavy, suffocating silence that followed my words was shattered by the sharp, crisp rustle of expensive fabric. Senator Sterling pushed his chair back and stood up to his full commanding height. The seasoned politician had seen enough. The absolute moral rot of the Vance family was fully exposed, laid bare under the harsh light of their own staggering greed and staggering incompetence. He looked down at Richard not with anger, but with the cold, calculating disgust of a man evaluating a diseased insect. The illusion of a mutually beneficial corporate merger between two elite Boston families had been burned to ash, leaving only the pathetic reality of a desperate criminal trying to purchase a lifeline. He reached down methodically, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with an air of absolute terrifying finality. "Richard, expect a call from my lawyers first thing tomorrow morning?" The senator stated, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that left absolutely no room for negotiation or debate. "We will ensure every single cent you spent on this sham of an engagement, every fraudulent dollar you attempted to launder through our family name, is thoroughly audited and exposed. We are completely done here." Richard did not even possess the strength to nod. He simply stared blankly at the polished wood of the table, his chest still heaving with irregular, panicked gasps. He knew the senator possessed the political and legal firepower to not only expedite the IRS investigation I had just initiated, but to ensure the resulting federal prison sentence was as draconian as legally possible. Richard was a man who had spent his entire life trading on favors, intimidation, and wealth. Now, stripped of all three, he was absolutely nothing. Vivian Sterling rose gracefully to join her husband. She bypassed Beatrice, who was still weeping pathetically on the wine-soaked floor, and completely ignored the hyperventilating ruin of my father in the corner. Instead, she walked deliberately around the massive circular table until she stood directly in front of me. The icy, aristocratic disdain she had previously directed at my family was entirely gone from her face. She reached out, placing a warm, genuinely maternal hand on my shoulder. Her touch was firm and grounding, an offering of absolute respect that stood in sharp, painful contrast to the frantic, clawing grip my own mother had used just moments before to try and pull me down into the mud with her. "You are a remarkable young woman, Chloe," Vivian said, her voice filled with a quiet, profound sincerity. Her intelligent eyes searched my face, recognizing the years of sheer endurance it had taken for me to survive this family and emerge victorious on my own terms. "I am so terribly sorry you were born into this absolute mess. It takes an incredible amount of strength to build a life out of the wreckage they handed you. If you ever need anything in Washington, D.C., my door is always open to you." The weight of her words settled over me, a profound validation from a woman who recognized true grit and genuine character. I gave her a small, respectful nod, feeling a tight knot of tension dissolve in my chest. "Thank you, Mrs. Sterling," I replied evenly. "That means a great deal to me." As the Sterling parents turned to make their exit toward the private dining room doors, Marcus prepared to follow them. His movement seemed to break whatever paralyzing spell had gripped Vanessa. Realizing that the billionaire lifestyle she felt she was fundamentally owed was literally walking out the door, she scrambled up from her chair. Her designer dress was wrinkled. Her perfect blowout was a tangled mess, and her face was slick with a mixture of expensive cosmetics and desperate, panicked tears. "Marcus, please," Vanessa sobbed, throwing herself forward. She grabbed frantically at the sleeve of his jacket, her manicured nails digging into the dark fabric. "Marcus, I love you. I had no choice. They forced me to take the money. I can change. I promise you I can change. We belong together. You cannot leave me like this." Marcus stopped. He did not yank his arm away defensively. He simply looked down at the trembling, hysterical woman who had almost successfully trapped him in a lifetime of calculated deceit. His handsome face betrayed absolutely zero emotion. There was no lingering affection, no pity, and no residual anger. He looked at her as if she were a complete stranger, aggressively asking for spare change on the sidewalk. He slowly reached over and effortlessly detached her grasping fingers from his jacket, peeling her hand away and letting it drop back to her side. "You do not know how to love anything but yourself, Vanessa," Marcus said, his voice flat, analytical, and perfectly even. "You do not love me. You love the safety I provide. You love the status my last name grants you. You love the reflection of your own absolute vanity that my bank account allows you to magically maintain. You are exactly like them, Vanessa let out a sharp, devastated wail, her knees buckling slightly as the absolute finality of his words registered. She slumped back against the edge of the dining table, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she finally mourned the true love of her life, the Sterling family fortune. She was entirely broken, unable to process a reality where her beauty and manipulation had catastrophically failed her. Marcus turned his back on the smoking, catastrophic wreckage of the Vance family. He adjusted his cuffs, his composure instantly snapping back into place, a man completely unbothered by the destruction he was leaving in his wake. He took a few steps toward the exit, falling in line behind his powerful parents, but then he paused. He stopped near the doorway and slowly turned around. His sharp, calculating eyes swept past the sobbing women and the paralyzed, broken patriarch, locking directly onto me. The professional respect I had seen in his gaze earlier had deepened into something entirely different, a profound, highly engaged curiosity. He had just watched a woman systematically dismantle her abusers with the precision of a surgeon, and he was undeniably intrigued. "Ms. Vance, Marcus," said his voice carrying clearly across the ruined dining room, cutting through the pathetic sounds of my family weeping. "I am heading back to Washington right now. My jet has an open seat." He tilted his head slightly, a small knowing smirk playing at the very corner of his mouth as he held my gaze. "May I offer you a ride?" I held Marcus Sterling's gaze for a long, silent moment. The offer hanging in the air was not merely a polite gesture regarding transportation. It was a profound acknowledgement of my victory. It was a silent, undeniable alignment between two professionals who understood the brutal, unforgiving currency of power leverage and absolute truth. I looked at the man who had just ruthlessly severed his ties to my toxic family, recognizing a shared appreciation for surgical precision. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Sterling," I replied, my voice steady and ringing clear in the ruined space. "I have a flight to catch anyway. Back to my actual job in Washington." Marcus gave a single decisive nod, the smirk at the corner of his mouth turning into a brief, genuine expression of respect. "I will have the driver bring the car around to the private entrance. Give me 2 minutes to warm it up." With a final entirely dismissive glance at the weeping catastrophic remains of my parents and sister, he turned on his heel. He strode out the heavy oak doors with athletic grace, the sharp click of the brass latch echoing through the room like the drop of a guillotine blade. The very second the door clicked shut, the stifled, suffocating atmosphere in the dining room violently ruptured. A shrill, animalistic shriek tore from Vanessa's throat, a sound so raw and ugly it sounded like tearing metal. She scrambled up from the table, her movements clumsy and frantic. Her heavy wooden chair tipped backward, crashing loudly onto the hardwood floor, but she did not even flinch. She was a horrifying sight, completely stripped of her curated high society glamour. Her custom silk designer gown was heavily stained with spilled Merlot clinging wetly to her legs. Her perfectly contoured hair was plastered to her sweaty forehead, and thick, dark tracks of expensive mascara stained her cheeks like war paint. She charged at me across the room, her expensive heels crunching over the shattered remains of fine crystal china. Her hands were curled into rigid claws, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You did this!" Vanessa screamed, her voice breaking into a hysterical, raspy screech that bounced off the high ceiling. She stopped just inches from my face, her chest heaving violently, spraying faint droplets of saliva as she yelled, "You ruined my life. You took away my fiancé and my money. You planned this entire thing just to destroy me because you have always been jealous of me." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. I stood my ground, my posture immaculate in my tailored charcoal blazer, staring directly into her bloodshot, panicked eyes. I let her tidal wave of rage wash over me completely unaffected by the explosive temper tantrum of a spoiled, vindictive child who had just been permanently stripped of her favorite toy. "I didn't take Marcus," I stated, my voice dangerously low, slicing cleanly through her hysterical sobbing. "Your lies did. I didn't take your money. You never had any to begin with." Vanessa flinched violently as if I had physically struck her across the face, but I was not finished. I stepped 1 inch closer, forcing her to look at the stark, undeniable reality she had aggressively avoided for her entire 28 years of existence. Everything you claimed as yours was stolen, borrowed, or fraudulent. I continued, enunciating every syllable with lethal precision. You spent your entire life stepping on my neck to make yourself look taller, Vanessa. You took credit for my academic work in high school so you could fake your way into a respectable college. You let Mom and Dad throw me out into the street with absolutely nothing so you could keep your precious allowance and fund your European shopping trips. You built your entire fake glittering persona on my enforced silence and Dad's embezzled cash. She opened her mouth to scream again, but no sound came out. She was hyperventilating, her eyes darting wildly around the room, looking for someone to rescue her. Now you're standing on your own 2 feet, I whispered, my expression shifting into one of pure clinical pity. And look how small you are. My words systematically stripped away the very last desperate layers of her delusion. She realized with crushing, undeniable certainty that she was no longer the golden child holding court. She was a fraud entirely exposed in front of the one person she had spent her entire life feeling vastly superior to. But deep-seated narcissism dies a long, ugly death, and Vanessa desperately grabbed for the absolute last weapon she thought she still possessed. She bared her teeth, her hands trembling violently at her sides as she took a step back. "At least I still have this family," Vanessa screamed, gesturing wildly toward the weeping Beatrice and the catatonic broken Richard. "At least I have a home. You'll always be an outcast. You will always be the daughter they threw away like garbage. We will survive this because Mom and Dad will fix it, and we will still be the Vance family. You do not belong here, and you have absolutely nothing." Hearing her favorite daughter's desperate pleading logic, Beatrice let out another mournful, pathetic sob from her place on the floor. She reached a shaking hand toward Vanessa. "We will fix it, baby," Beatrice croaked, still blindly trying to enable the delusion. "We still have the Beacon Hill estate. We can sell the art, we can downsize, but we will keep our home. We will stay together and lock the doors." I listened to their pathetic, desperate clinging to a reality that had already been incinerated. They truly foolishly believed that the thick brick walls of their multi-million-dollar historic mansion could somehow shield them from federal indictments, asset seizures, and total bankruptcy. A slow, chilling smirk spread across my face, a genuine expression of absolute victory. I broke eye contact with my hyperventilating sister and calmly reached my hand into my leather briefcase one final time. My fingers brushed against the crisp, heavy manila folder I had purposefully saved for the very end of this execution. "About that home," I said smoothly, pulling the document free. I tossed the thick, heavy manila envelope directly onto the center of the ruined table. It landed with a wet, heavy slap right on top of the puddle of spilled Merlot. The dark, expensive wine immediately began seeping into the crisp paper edges, staining the official legal seal. Vanessa stared at it, her tear-streaked face scrunching in absolute confusion. Richard, however, physically recoiled as if I had just thrown a live, ticking grenade into his lap. His breath hitched sharply in his throat. He knew exactly what kind of oversized envelopes came from federal banking institutions. Since Dad could not pay the mortgage for the last 8 months, I announced, my voice carrying a terrifying conversational lightness that echoed perfectly off the crystal chandeliers above us. "The bank officially auctioned off your precious Boston estate last week." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Richard let out a guttural wet sound, something caught violently between a choke and a sob. His shoulders slumped forward as the last invisible pillar supporting his massive ego snapped in half. His eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. He had frantically buried the final notices, intercepted the certified mail before it reached the house, and deliberately hidden the impending foreclosure from his wife and daughter. He had been desperately treading water in a stormy sea of insurmountable debt, praying every single night that Marcus Sterling would blindly wire millions into the Vance accounts before the bank padlocked the front doors and changed the locks. He had gambled his entire family's shelter on a fake wedding, and he had lost everything. Beatrice turned her head slowly. Her neck snapped toward her husband with a mechanical, terrifying rigidity. The realization of his absolute, unforgivable deception washed over her sharp features, twisting her face into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She realized in that exact second that he had lied to her every single day for nearly a year. He had let her plan extravagant catering menus, host high society luncheons, and boast to her wealthy friends in a historic house they technically no longer owned. "You knew!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice shattering the last remaining fragments of her dignified high society persona. She lunged at him like a wild animal, her manicured hands curled into tight fists as she began violently striking his chest, his shoulders, his face. "You kept this from me. You let me plan a wedding knowing we were completely bankrupt. You promised me we were safe. You swore the money was there." Richard weakly tried to raise his heavy arms to block her relentless blows, but he was entirely defeated. He just sat there, absorbing the physical hits from his enraged wife, tears streaming continuously down his purple mottled face. He offered no defense because there was none left to give. Vanessa had backed herself up against the expensive wallpaper, clutching the ruined fabric of her silk dress. She was hyperventilating, taking in huge gulping breaths as she watched the complete violent collapse of her parents' marriage play out in real time. Her entire reality, the foundation of wealth and privilege she had used to crush anyone beneath her, was currently dissolving into nothing but smoke and federal indictments. I let them fight for a full minute. I simply stood there, my posture perfect, absorbing the sweet, absolute justice of the moment. I had waited over a decade for this exact reckoning. Then I cleared my throat. The sharp, authoritative sound immediately commanded the room, halting Beatrice's frantic, sobbing assault. Both of my parents turned to look at me. They were panting, completely broken and waiting for the final blow to fall. "When a property of this magnitude goes to public auction," I continued, smoothly resting my hands lightly on the high back of my dining chair, "it is typically purchased by anonymous holding companies. A blind LLC bought the estate out from under the bank. It was a straight cash transaction, very clean, very fast, and completely untraceable to the general public." Richard blinked rapidly, trying to force his panicked brain to process the financial data. "Who?" He wheezed, his voice barely a rasp. "Who bought it?" I smiled. It was not a warm, forgiving smile. It was the smile of an apex predator watching its prey realize the steel jaws of the trap had already sprung shut. "My LLC." I stated softly, letting the impossible truth settle over the room. "I own the house you are currently standing in, Dad. I hold the deed. I hold the title. I own the very floorboards you are crying on." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum sucking the oxygen directly out of their lungs. Vanessa sank slowly down the wall until she hit the floor, pulling her knees tightly to her chest. Her brain simply could not compute the sheer scale of the reversal. The sister she had relentlessly bullied, the sister she had mocked for working late shifts through college and wearing thrift store clothes, was now her literal landlord. Beatrice looked at me as if I had suddenly grown horns, but how she stammered, her hands shaking violently at her sides. "How could you possibly afford it? You work for the government. You are a public servant. You make a standard salary." I shook my head, genuinely marveling at their sheer, profound ignorance. "Federal auditors make a comfortable living, Mother," I explained, using her title with heavy, mocking irony. "But my real money came from the federal whistleblower reward program. When you expose massive multi-million-dollar corporate fraud rings that successfully recover stolen taxpayer funds, the government pays you a very handsome percentage of the recovered assets. I have personally taken down 3 major corrupt financial firms in the last 5 years. While you were spending Dad's stolen money on designer handbags and pointless galas, I was quietly building a massive, highly diversified investment portfolio." Buying the Vance estate was absolute pocket change. Richard groaned loudly, burying his face deep into his hands. He was crying openly now, loud, racking sobs of total, humiliating defeat. His own daughter had essentially purchased his entire legacy using the reward money she earned by locking up men exactly like him. I stepped away from the chair, preparing to turn my back on them forever and take Marcus up on his offer. Before I walked away, I reached forward and firmly tapped the wine-soaked envelope resting on the table. "That is a 30-day eviction notice," I said, my voice completely devoid of mercy or hesitation. "You have exactly 1 month to clear your personal belongings out of my property. Anything left behind on day 31 will be thrown directly into a dumpster. Pack your bags." The heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room swung shut behind me, but they could not contain the explosive shockwave of the Vance family's final collapse. I walked down the long, opulent corridor of the country club, my leather briefcase grasped firmly in my hand. The hallway was lined with antique oil paintings, ornate sconces, and gilded mirrors projecting an atmosphere of generational wealth and quiet, unshakable dignity. It stood in stark, almost comical contrast to the visceral, feral screaming that was now erupting from the room I had just exited. The sound of my heels striking the polished hardwood floor echoed sharply off the vaulted ceilings. Each step was a rhythmic, unyielding crack marking time, like the relentless ticking of an executioner's clock. I did not rush my pace. I did not look over my shoulder. Behind me, the fragile, meticulously curated illusion of family loyalty was being shredded into confetti. Without the binding glue of trust funds, social status, and offshore bank accounts, there was absolutely nothing left to hold them together. I could hear Beatrice shrieking, her voice completely stripped of its cultured mid-Atlantic affectation. It was devolving into the raw, guttural screech of a cornered animal. She was screaming at Richard, hurling decades of repressed resentment and venom at the man who had just bankrupted her entire social existence. She cursed his arrogance, his stupidity, and his spectacular failure to maintain the lavish lives she required to breathe. The sharp sound of shattering porcelain punctuated her rage, likely a water pitcher or a heavy serving platter being hurled blindly against the wall. Then Vanessa's voice sliced through the din, shrill and dripping with absolute malice. She was no longer mourning the loss of Marcus Sterling. She was turning her rage directly onto the woman who had created her. I could hear Vanessa screaming at Beatrice, blaming her mother for indulging Richard's delusions, for teaching her that a rich husband was the only currency that mattered, and for failing to aggressively secure the family's assets when the warning signs first appeared. Vanessa was viciously tearing her mother apart using the exact same psychological cruelty Beatrice had wielded against me for my entire life. They were cannibalizing each other. It was a spectacular, violent implosion of three narcissists who suddenly realized they were trapped in a burning room together, and the only remaining survival tactic was to climb over each other's bodies. They had never loved one another. Their affection was entirely transactional, based on what utility they could provide to the family brand. They had only loved the comfort and the reflection of their own superiority that the Vance fortune had provided. Now that the mirror was completely shattered, they finally saw the monsters they truly were. I reached the grand foyer of the country club, ignoring the wide-eyed, terrified stares of the valet staff and the maitre d', who had undoubtedly heard the screaming echoing down the pristine hall. I pushed through the heavy brass and glass double doors and stepped out onto the expansive stone portico. The immediate hit of the cool, sharp Boston air was a physical shock to my system, flushing the stale, toxic atmosphere of the dining room completely from my lungs. The sky above the city had bruised into a deep, turbulent purple while we were inside. The heavy, oppressive humidity that had suffocated the city all morning had finally reached its absolute breaking point. A massive, sudden thunderstorm cracked open the sky directly overhead. A brilliant, jagged flash of lightning illuminated the manicured grounds of the club, followed instantly by a deafening roll of thunder that vibrated right through the soles of my shoes. The rain did not start as a gentle drizzle. It dropped from the sky in a torrential, punishing deluge. The smell of ozone and wet asphalt filled the air. I stepped out from beneath the protective overhang of the portico and directly into the downpour. I did not care that my tailored blazer was getting soaked, that the expensive fabric was turning dark with moisture, or that my hair was plastering itself to my cheeks. I lifted my face to the dark, churning sky and closed my eyes, letting the freezing, aggressive sheets of water hit my skin. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated cinematic catharsis. The rain felt like a brutal but necessary baptism, aggressively washing away the invisible grime of a lifetime of gaslighting, emotional neglect, and psychological warfare. Every lie they had ever told me, every single time they had made me feel small, unloved, and unworthy, was being systematically stripped away. The trauma was swirling down the storm drains along with the dust and dirt of the pavement, leaving nothing but clean slate behind. I was finally completely free of them. I lowered my head and opened my eyes, a clean, steady adrenaline pumping through my veins. Through the thick gray curtain of the driving rain, I saw a sleek black town car idling smoothly in the circular driveway. The headlights cut twin golden beams through the darkness of the storm, reflecting off the flooded pavement. Standing casually beside the open rear passenger door was Marcus Sterling. He was completely unfazed by the torrential weather, holding a large black golf umbrella steady over his head. The rain bounced harmlessly off his impeccably tailored suit shoulders, and his posture remained relaxed, vigilant, and entirely composed. He was watching me. He had likely witnessed my moment of quiet triumph in the rain, and he did not look at me with pity, confusion, or impatience. As I walked purposefully down the stone steps toward the driveway, my briefcase swinging lightly at my side, Marcus smiled. It was not a romantic smile. It was not the polished, diplomatic, entirely fake smile he reserved for corporate boardrooms or high society galas. It was a smile of deep, profound, and undeniable respect. He recognized the exact magnitude of the brutal war I had just fought and won. He recognized an absolute equal. He stepped forward slightly as I approached, tilting the wide umbrella to perfectly encompass me, shielding me from the driving storm. He reached out and smoothly took the heavy leather briefcase from my hand, holding the car door a little wider. Ready to go home, Ms. Vance? I looked at the man standing in the pouring rain, holding the door to his town car, and I nodded. Yes, Marcus, I replied, my voice steady over the roar of the thunderstorm. I am more than ready. 1 exact week later, the Boston thunderstorm felt like a lifetime away. I sat behind my custom mahogany desk in my massive glass-walled office overlooking the United States Capitol. The morning sun hit the gleaming white dome, casting a brilliant, authoritative light across my workspace. This was my domain. There were no fake crystal chandeliers here, no forced high society luncheons, and absolutely no ghosts of the Vance family legacy. A sharp ping from my tablet broke the morning silence. The notification banner flashed across the screen. Capital Elite magazine had officially hit the newsstands nationwide. I tapped the screen, opening the digital edition. My own face stared back at me, crisp, professional, and radiating absolute power. The headline stretched across the cover in bold typography: "The Whistleblower Who Built an Empire." I was not featured as someone's daughter or someone's neglected sister. I was featured as a self-made titan who had recovered millions in stolen taxpayer funds and quietly built an untouchable investment portfolio. By noon, that magazine would be resting on every single mahogany coffee table in Boston, right under Beatrice's nose. A second chime echoed from my desktop computer. The sender was my lead real estate attorney. I opened the email and read the single, deeply satisfying paragraph. The Vance family had officially vacated the premises at midnight. They had packed whatever meager belongings they could fit into a rented sedan and surrendered the keys to my property manager. The historic Boston estate was completely empty, completely secured, and entirely mine. Attached to the bottom of the email was a forwarded notice from the federal prosecutor's office. The IRS had successfully executed a total freeze on Richard's remaining offshore accounts. The federal indictments were officially unsealed. He had zero leverage, zero funds, and zero escape routes. He was going to a federal penitentiary, and Beatrice and Vanessa were entirely on their own, stripped of the wealth they had used to terrorize everyone around them. Absolute ruin was confirmed. The intercom on my desk buzzed sharply. "Ms. Vance, my assistant announced Marcus Sterling is here for your 10 o'clock meeting. Send him in," I instructed, closing the legal email and centering a thick-bound portfolio on my desk. The heavy oak door opened and Marcus stepped into my office. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his posture relaxed but commanding. The dynamic between us had fundamentally shifted since that rainy afternoon in Boston. There was no longer any pretense of a social arrangement. There was no fake engagement to negotiate. We were no longer two people trapped in Richard Vance's web of financial manipulation. We were strictly professional equals, operating on a plane of mutual respect and intellectual parity. "Good morning, Chloe," Marcus said, taking a seat in one of the leather armchairs opposite my desk. "Good morning, Marcus." I gestured to the thick portfolio resting between us. "I have spent the last 48 hours reviewing your revised proposal for the Vanguard project." Marcus did not flinch. He sat comfortably waiting for my assessment. "When we first discussed this acquisition," I continued, leaning back in my chair, "your overhead projections were incredibly bloated. You were bleeding capital to cover Richard's exorbitant consulting fees and the phantom administrative costs he demanded to keep his own sinking ship afloat." Marcus nodded slowly, acknowledging the brutal truth. "I cut the dead weight," he stated simply. "His toxicity is no longer dragging down my bottom line." I opened the portfolio, turning to the final page. "You did more than cut the dead weight. Without my father's interference, your supply chain logistics are incredibly lean. Your profit margins are aggressive, and your risk assessment is flawless. You completely restructured the bid, Marcus, and you created a masterpiece of corporate strategy." I picked up my platinum fountain pen. "I am approving your company's bid for the Vanguard project." I signed my name with a swift, decisive stroke on the final line of the contract. "I am not doing this as a favor. I am doing this because, objectively speaking, it is the most lucrative, structurally sound proposal on my desk." Marcus stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He reached across the desk and I stood to meet him. We shook hands, the grip firm and professional. "I appreciate your objectivity, Ms. Vance. It is a pleasure doing real business with you." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Sterling." Marcus turned and walked out of the office, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. The room fell perfectly silent again. I walked around my desk and stepped right up to the edge of the floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the sprawling landscape of Washington, D.C. The traffic moved in orderly lines far below me. The monuments stood tall and unyielding against the bright morning sky. I crossed my arms, feeling the fine, expensive fabric of my suit, feeling the solid, undeniable reality of the life I had built. For 25 years, I had allowed the Vance family to dictate my worth. They had branded me. They called me the ugly dropout. They labeled me the socially unfit mistake. They treated me like a broken, defective cog in their flawless, glittering machine. But the machine was a complete fraud running on stolen money and desperate lies. I had not just gotten my revenge against them. Revenge was too small, too bitter a word for what I had accomplished. I had reclaimed my entire narrative. I had seized the pen from their hands and rewritten the ending of my own story. They were sitting in a cheap motel room right now, staring at federal prison sentences and total bankruptcy, entirely erased from the society they worshipped. I was standing in a glass tower overlooking the capital of the free world, holding the deeds to their legacy and the keys to my own empire. I was the architect of my own destiny. The Vance family had tried to bury me in the dirt, completely unaware that I was a seed. I smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached all the way to my eyes. The sweet, undeniable truth washed over me, settling deep into my bones. The best revenge is never about screaming, fighting, or destroying the people who hurt you. The best revenge is absolute, untouchable success. The story of Chloe's triumph over her toxic family illustrates that the ultimate form of revenge is not vindictive destruction, but untouchable personal success. For years, the Vance family defined her worth, labeling her a failure while building their own lives on financial fraud and illusions of grandeur. Instead of engaging in their chaotic toxicity, Chloe quietly built an empire. By focusing on her own growth, financial independence, and professional excellence, she reclaimed her narrative and broke the cycle of manipulation. True power lies in defining your own destiny. Share a time you proved your doubters wrong and comment below.